around in all the news this week about, Premier resigning, about the Voice, about Qantas, was a warning that strikes me as a scandal, or something that should be a scandal in a first world country like this. It's a warning from the Bureau of Meteorology that this summer, which will be a hotter one because of the El Nino, is going to be a risk to Australia's energy grid. And it's not just because more Australians will, of course, be wanting more air conditioning, which means more electricity. The Bureau said it's also because we really rely more now on wind power. And there's actually going to be, they predict, something called a wind drought. And exactly where a lot of wind farms are, there'll be less wind, like we saw in Europe last year with all the trouble that caused that continent. Joining me is Professor Bruce Mountain. He's Director of the Victoria Energy Policy Centre. Professor Mountain, thank you again for your time. Can you explain, why is our power supply in danger from a wind drought? How does all this work?
Hi, Andrew. We have an electrical system that is weather dependent in many ways. Even before we'd harnessed the wind and the sun to produce electricity, our coal and gas production is affected heavily by weather, most notably in peak temperatures. So these aren't new. We now have a different or a more diverse range of threats, including wind production if there are doldrums for extended periods, and also obviously in winter a lack of sun. So we have a changing electricity mix that's exposed to the weather. Generally speaking, wind's production, whether it's El Nino or not, tends to be lower in the middle of the day when the sun is shining, and tends to be higher in the morning and the evening when land sea temperature differences cause a fairly consistent wind to blow. I think that's likely to continue to be the case, but El Nino may bring longer periods of doldrums.
Right, and it's also struck me, I don't know whether this is just, anecdote or evidence, that often when we get a real heat wave sitting on a city, the winds tend to be very low. Just when more people will be turning on aircon, you've got less wind to blow, at least the wind farms in the region. But I thought we were building a system that'd be more resilient, to be honest. What's gone wrong that we're not coping with a wind drought?
I don't think there's evidence yet to say that we're not coping with a wind drought. A greater proportion of our variable renewable production now comes from the sun, and mostly from households, than from the wind as an aggregate, if we add up the production in all of the states. So I don't think it's yet clear the nature of the wind production risk that we'll face. But I think El Nino can have very significant effects on the power system, most notably through heating up of transmission power lines, which reduce their transfer capability, lower winds cooling those lines, which also reduces their transfer capability, bushfires affecting transmission lines as well as the low voltage distribution lines, and most notably the susceptibility of many of our coal-fired generators, mainly those in New South Wales and Queensland, the black coal ones, to very high temperatures. So it's always been the case that severe summers and El Nino summers have brought on a great deal of nervousness, and I think that will continue to be the case. But I don't think wind alone is the fall guy here. There's a range of factors, and I think an even bigger one really is likely to be the difficulty of our coal-fired generators keeping up in these extreme temperature peaks.
Well, that's made all the more worse by the fact that the owners of those the coal-fired power stations, which are ageing, have been disincentivised to actually invest in the upgrades that they say they need. They're much more rickety now because of that. So, golly, how this is all going to work out, I do not know. Professor Bruce Mountain, thank you so much indeed for your time.